Welcome to the Essence of Health Tea Time Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Shayla Toombs-Withers. As a double board certified family and obesity medicine physician with over 12 years of experience in medicine, I teach motivated individuals how to achieve their desired quality of life while preventing and reversing chronic diseases. It's tea time. On today's episode of the Essence of Health Tea Time Podcast, I have a special guest, Dr. Jeff Crippen. Dr. Jeff is a chiropractor, nutritionist, and coach who enjoys helping others unlock their true potential. For the last decade, Dr. Jeff has helped clients both through chiropractic care and nutrition at his wellness clinic in St. Joe, Texas, as well as through individualized mindset coaching with Advanced Coaching and Leadership Center. He is also a published author of the book Timeless Youth, which contains 5 key principles that his practice and his life are built on today. I'm happy to have Dr. Jeff on the show as we discuss more about holistic wellness. So thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Jeff.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Shayla. Pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah. So being a holistic healthcare provider, what are some of the common concerns you encounter when one is challenged with the condition of obesity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think you've talked about this on your podcast, and you brought up some great guests that talk about a lot of those elements, because really there's a lot of pieces of it. But I think one of the biggest things I would say is just confusion on the topic, right? I mean, it's the like weight loss industry is a huge industry. And I think weight loss books alone, it could be like, there's topics coming out every month on what exactly it takes. And one book, as you know, contradicts another, and then there's different schools of thought. So it's just the confusion. And then, so I'd say that's one step. And then I think the second thing is really most patients have tried to lose weight if they've tried that. And then most of them have failed or had a bad experience at some point. So it's kind of like you're touching the hot stove, and you have to find out what worked for them in the past, but also what hasn't worked for the past, and be understanding of what they already have tried and what they've gone through. When we work through it, I think there's a couple systems and principles that we think through. One is certainly, we'll work through cleaning up the liver and detoxifying. Certainly toxicity can be a barrier for weight loss. Second one is we'll work through, balance of sugar, carbohydrates, fruits, fructose consumption, as those can be triggers for them. We can look at the stressor of allergies and how that can affect, whether it's food or environmental. We can work through thyroid support, taking a look at what those numbers are, using blood work as a really good guide for that. And, not just looking at just those numbers, but actually putting those into wellness ranges. And then I think obviously have to look at blood sugar, insulin sensitivity, and adrenal balance, and kind of stress kind of gets into those. So there's kind of different buckets we'll work through, and we'll work with people kind of step by step, depending on where that is. And obviously diet, sugar, carbohydrate, and then kind of the importance of protein can be really important, especially glutamine can be really helpful in that process. So kind of working through those things. But as you kind of talk about, you need a system, because most patients come in confused, and most patients come in having tried something and failed before. So those are a couple barriers I find that are really important to handle right at the beginning, and give them some positive momentum, like help them win, help them get some success early, because that makes it easier to develop those positive habits.
Yeah. And, I'm glad you touched on just a variety of those factors, because what we know, about obesity and about weight loss is that there is no one size fits all type of,
Sure.
dynamic that goes on. I'm not sure how long you've been practicing, Dr. Jeff, but I've been practicing for well over a decade now. And I know even what I was taught in medical school about weight maintenance and those factors versus what we now know in the world of, clinical obesity and weight management is even so much different, just in that time frame. And we know that it's so much more complex even than just that calories out, calories in, and all that, all these other kind of crash diets and things that people have tried over the years.
Just out of curiosity, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen over those 10 years in practice?
Yeah, even I would say just even that one, for so long we were just telling people, well, if you outwork the number of calories you
Sure.
consume,
Yeah.
then everything will be great. So then you have people, I always use the analogy, for instance, like those little 100-calorie pack things. So,
Uh-huh.
yeah, you can say, I'm going to consume a 1,200-calorie diet, and you can go eat 12 of those 100-calorie pack of Oreos, for instance, but you're
Sure.
not going to be very well nourished,
Sure.
in doing that. And you're probably going to be hungry versus if you
Yeah.
ate 1,200 calories of some other type of food. So, I love using that just as one example of how it's not as simplistic as just that calories out, calories in, or we're just going to match this calorie count kind of deal.
Yeah. I think that's great because obviously what you're explaining there with that example is all calories aren't created equal, right?
Exactly.
Which is 100% true. And then I think what you're also alluding to there, which is like, what also has to be looked at is what controls how many calories the body burns or that basal
Hmm.
metabolic rate, right?
Exactly.
Because there's some people who can be on a very calorie restricted kind of diet and not lose weight,
Yep.
right? And then it's not just a calorie issue. And most of what we do actually don't spend a lot of time on calories. To spend probably that's maybe less than 10 or 15% of kind of how we look at it. It's much more on the quality of foods and the
Hmm.
types of foods, and starting that way. And I was going to say the second part, just connected to that, is looking at what controls that basal metabolic rate, and obviously thyroid, which you talked about on your last podcast, is
Yeah.
important. But even pituitary and hypothalamus, the two glands that kind of are just senior to that, the thyroid, and kind of help regulate thyroid function, are really important. That what I found, regulators of that basal metabolic rate are basically how many calories are you burning on a daily basis.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. So it is. It's just so complex. Now, I often share with my patients the concept of food as medicine, where we can use food to heal, then introduce to them the fact that food can also cause some health challenges by
Sure.
promoting disease, even, like talking about those 1,200, those 12-calorie pack, 100-calorie
Yeah.
pack type of deal. And so I know that you also promote a focus on healthful nutrition within the care that you provide. So how does stress and trauma even play a part in our food choices and our want to eat even beyond that point of fullness?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think it's kind of what you're asking with that question. The answer is very important because,
Yeah,
when you ask someone about when you're stressed, do you typically reach for like kale and a turkey burger?
right.
Right? No, you're
No,
reaching for
you're not.
those.
You get the
You're
ice
reaching
cream
for
and the
those 100
milkshake.
calories packs.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're reaching for the whole box of them or the
Yeah.
milkshake, like you said. Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things, listening to your podcast and talking to you, you're trying to get people outside kind of that simple paradigm of calories in, calories out equals weight loss, right? And because obviously there's a lot of flaws in that.
Mhm.
Um, there's some truth to it, but there's a lot of flaws, and it excludes a lot of factors. And I think that one right there about looking at the person as a whole person, as an individual person, and recognizing how stress affects them is a big part of it.
Yeah, yeah. And now we know that, there's more evidence that's come about within medical literature. We talked about how just even in the field of medicine, things have changed so much over the years. And one of
Yeah.
those things we know is with our childhood environment and experience and how those things play a part in the health challenges that we face. So as someone, I know, when you and I met and we chatted, you share openly a lot about your childhood health experience. So if you can just share a bit of that with your story and then your thoughts and findings on how that childhood stress and trauma can contribute to weight gain and unhealthy nutrition practices.
Yeah, sure. So a little bit about my source. As you mentioned, I'm a chiropractor and a naturopath, and the way I got into this is, um, actually I had really no interest in getting into healthcare. This kind of felt like it was kind of the road just kind of took me there, and how that kind of fork in my life started was at around age 6. I started to get some headaches, and then I did what I knew to do, what my family knew to do, which is you go to the pediatrician and you start with some over the counter, some children's Tylenol, some children's Motrin, and then the headaches continued to get worse. So started on some little stronger ibuprofen, and eventually got on some prescription pain relievers and muscle relaxers and headache preventatives. And Imitrex was a big, some of this class of, I think it's tryptophans or triptans. which
Depends,
is that
yeah.
headache class that came out in the early 90s that was really
Mhm.
popular. So you start working through, and then did low dose antidepressants as a preventative anyway, work through a series of different prescription drugs. And what I felt is my headaches keep getting worse and worse throughout the whole thing. So obviously I got frustrated,
Yeah.
and it just, you're just building up, and it says like, it feels like what I thought would work wasn't working. So at its worst, I had a headache for 2 years. So every moment, every day, nonstop for 2 years. So it builds up a lot of frustration over that time. And finally, at its lowest point, I just decided I can't go on living like this. Like, I'm not going to continue to suffer through this. And either I'm going to figure out what's going on, or I didn't really want to think what the other option was. Right. But it was like, I just got to figure this out. So I started searching until I had the first question, and start reading about it, and you start trying stuff and start testing and measuring. And, you read one book, and then you read another book that contradicts the first book. And then you read a blog. And then, this is kind of before podcast,
Yeah.
about 20 years ago, but, certainly reading and studying and trying to figure things out, and just kind of sorting through that confusion. So what I eventually found was, just I rebuilt my body with whole food nutrition, you know, starting from the ground up, and then did kind of specific kind of supplements to help rebuild my body. But and initially what that entailed was cutting out sugar, cutting out dairy at the time. And now for most people, I would say that's cutting out processed refined grains, processed wheat would be
Mhm.
the kind of the three big things to kind of three levers to pull there, just in terms of calming down inflammation in the body and helping the person become healthier. So that was kind of my experience with it. And then as I went through that, then I read, so then I was going through school and started practicing, and found there was more affecting patients' health than just the food they ate.
Right.
Right. And I came across, the CDC mentions up to 80% of all doctor visits are caused by stress. And then, medical textbooks will say somewhere between 60 and 75, or 60 and 80% of all disease is caused by stress. So you start looking around, and it says, what are we doing as a system that's really addressing this on a normal visit, right? You've talked about kind of the 15-minute visits, and that's
Yeah.
sometimes generous. Sometimes they're just
Right.
7-minute drive-through
Exactly.
visits,
Uh-huh.
and it's like, but the point is, there's not a lot of time to look at, as you said, that individual person, to see
Mhm.
what's unique about them and what's really going on. So as I started, diving into that, kind of really wanted to understand how, like so that 80%, so 60, 70, 80% of disease or doctor visits are caused by stress. But the question is how, and what effect does that have? And that was like a real spark, and something I had to look in the mirror to say, okay, so what am I going to do about it? If I know this, so
Right.
what is it going to mean? And that was kind of a change point for me.
Yeah. And then the point of the way our healthcare system is set up, knowing what we know that stress contributes to so many of these
Yeah.
conditions, is not really set up to address that because, of course, the patient isn't going to come in and tell you, hey, Dr. Jeff, it's just my stress, fix my stress. They're not going to tell you that.
Yeah.
They're going to say, oh, my neck hurts, my back hurts, I'm not sleeping well, I'm gaining weight, I'm tired in the daytime. They're going to have these other presentations for it. And then it's up to you to be able to narrow that down and be able to get to that root cause of what's going on, and how to help them more appropriately. Because we have stress pills, but we know those aren't. So those have their
Sure.
own set
Yeah.
of problems.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's so much more complex.
Sure. Yeah. And I think one way I start with that with clients is just asking them, how long have you felt this way? What's been the condition? And if someone doesn't have high blood pressure, then there's a change point, right? So something changed in the body at that point. Could be diet, could be lifestyle, could be stress, could be work related, could be whatever it is. There's a change point. One of my rules is every effect has a cause. So if you look at the point of change, you can really see something there. And it's the same thing with, I started gaining weight 3 months ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. Good. Okay. So what was going on just before that time? And sometimes by looking at that change point, and then you often have to educate the patient, like you're saying there, Dr. Shayla. It's like, so I'm not just looking for changes in diet, but any lifestyle changes, any change in job, any change in relationship, any
Right.
change in, an outside stressor, any shocks that happen in your life around that time, you know, and you start really opening up the conversation and just allowing the patient to meet you as far down that road as they want to.
Hmm.
But there's a lot, because like I said, every effect has a cause. And if we don't only look at the cause of, you know, what changed diet wise or what changed medication wise, and we open up to some of that, sometimes the patients will bring us that answer. Oh, yeah, actually, just when that happened, this was going on. And that can be the doorway in to help them with that.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's so important. If you're frustrated with your weight, taking more medications than you'd like to, have been told that you are at risk for the development of a chronic preventable disease, or just are not feeling in the best of health, then I'm talking to you. Why? Because you're tired of fat dieting. You know it's time for a change, and you want a sustainable plan to improve your health. If you have found yourself at this place in life, well, I have developed a program that's just for you. It's called The Essence of Health, and it's your prescription for transformation. My goal with this program is to give you the tools needed to create sustainable lifestyle changes within a group coaching setting, along with one-to-one individualized coaching to give you a personalized path to health that's just for you. The benefits are priceless, so join today. Head on over to eohcoaching.com to learn more. The essence of health is in you. And now, so what are some of the strategies or interventions that you have found that have shown promise in addressing that relationship between stress, trauma, and obesity? And then, are there any effective treatments or prevention methods that you recommend?
Great. Yeah. So one of the studies, just to kind of connect it to that we talked about the first time we talked, was that adverse childhood experiences study, or the ACEs study. And basically where that came out of was, there's a gentleman named Felitti, and he worked for Kaiser Permanente out in California. And his job was to investigate one of their weight loss clinics, which was in San Diego, and figure out why people were dropping out of the program. So this wasn't a weight loss clinic for somebody who wanted to lose 5 or 10 or 20 pounds. This was people who were minimum of 30, but 100, 200 pounds overweight. And his job was to figure out why they were dropping out. So he went down there and he interviewed 286 of the dropouts. And what he found as he was interviewing them was all of them were losing weight. So then he asked the question, so why? He asked the question himself, and later to those patients who were dropping out, he said, why are you dropping out if you're losing weight? And what he found is, they said, Doc, you don't understand. It's not about changing the diet or what we eat. It's the food is a mechanism to handle stress. Just like some people might use alcohol or some people might use other substances, we're using food to mask the stress. So he got curious at that point, and then went to the CDC and did a larger study, which is the one called the ACEs study, which did over 17,000 people. And what they looked at is 10 different types of adverse childhood experiences. So that's where
Yeah.
ACE comes from. So things like physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, domestic violence, separation or divorce of parents, a family member who was incarcerated, and went through those types of stress. And what they found was, if somebody had 4 of those stressors as a child compared to 0, the risk of alcoholism went up over 700%, a 200% increase in cancer, a 300% increase in obesity. And in addition to that, and what was really amazing was up to a 400% increase in emphysema. And the example I like to think of is whoever goes to their pulmonologist and says, I've got emphysema, and they're like, oh, tell me about your childhood.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
we talk
yeah.
about, and we talk about, so, and we talk about obesity owing up a 300, 400% increase risk. And, this has been replicated across cultures. It's been replicated in multiple countries, and it holds true for an increased risk of things like fetal death, illicit drug use, also shows up with suicide, STDs, unintended pregnancy. So the more stressful event someone has in childhood, the more it plays out across a whole variety of health outcomes. So your question is, what the heck do we do about it? Right? Which is a really
Right.
good question. And because of that, spent some time studying shocks and coaching and helping people through that. And, one of the things I found is we all have certain amount of attention bits, pieces of our attention. They can either be here in the present moment, they can be in the future on our goals and dreams, on what's to happen next, or they can be stuck in the past, right? And where they're stuck in the past, this is those painful incidents, those shocks, those memories that keep coming up,
Mm-hmm.
the things we don't want to think about, or we try not to think about. And the more of that attention that is stuck in the past, the less of us that's here in the present moment, right? The less of us that's here to have have attention, the less attention we have to put on our goals and dreams in the future. So what I found helpful for these patients is to take them through a specific type of coaching process. We call it a shock handling process, to go through that incident. And really what you're looking for in that incident, or what you're looking for to help the patient do, is experience the parts they don't want to experience, because it's the things that we resist that lock up our life force. If that makes sense. It's like, how much
Yeah.
attention do we have trying not to feel the pain, the heartache, the frustration, the
Right.
anger, whatever those mood levels are there. So working with them through that to remove the counter force. So I'll be able to feel those moods, emotions. And once you do that, instead of having the emotion here, the not wanting to feel the emotion, so like force, counter force, tying up that attention, the counter force can drop, the person can feel the emotion, and it can release. So, and there's quite noticeable signs you can see with someone as they do that. A simple example is that when, if we know someone who's passed away, they'll tell you sometimes you just got to get a good cry out, or it's better
Right.
to go through the grief rather to feel it, to experience it. That's a small example of what you want to do. But the point is, it's that sensation that you get after talking to a good friend where you just like lay everything out
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like 10 pounds lighter after
Yeah.
telling you
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. You got all that off your chest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It could be a very physical sensation. You can feel lighter. It can feel like it's off your chest. It can feel a release in your shoulders, but you can absolutely have a physical sensation from releasing that stress. So that's what we're looking for as you work through that. We're looking for that emotional release that translates into a physical release.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the ACEs study because it's groundbreaking, just the number of things
Uh-huh.
that we found that those childhood experiences are related to.
Yeah.
And it's even one of those things where if you think about it, those experiences that you did have in childhood will play a part in the decisions that you make in adulthood.
Yeah.
If you always felt neglected or always felt that every time, your parents didn't love you or what have you, you're going to have a hard time making those relationship connections and, those sort of decisions. And so it plays such an important part there.
Yeah, and that study goes through childhood adverse experiences. But what I found is, um, I'm not sure it's much different if some of those painful shocks happen to you at 6 or 16 or 26 or 36 or
Hmm.
86, right? A
Right.
shock is a shock, and those mechanics can happen the same way. So this study, the one we're talking about, looks specifically at childhood experiences. And I would just add to that, I don't see a huge difference. The mechanics still seem the same, whether that shock happened at 17 or 25 or later.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
There. Yeah. Now, so as a mindset coach, what tips would you have for someone challenged by life stressors and trauma and have found this to be impacting their health with the health condition like chronic obesity?
So I'll give you an example of I had a patient come in, and her goal on the first visit was to lose 70 pounds. That's what she was able to tell me. Her real goal, she told me like a year later, was actually to lose 100 pounds, but she was just kind of embarrassed to admit
Right.
that's how much she
Yeah.
wanted to
And she
lose.
probably had some fear that, and self-doubt that she couldn't lose that or,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So I went through that question that we talked about earlier. So how, when did you start losing, when did you gain the weight? What weight do you want to get to, and kind of when were you last there, and kind of walking through a timeline of when that was. And one of the things, you know, Politi talked about in that study is he said people often don't like slowly gain weight. It often goes up and jumps, gain like 20, 30 pounds kind of quickly, and then it'll level off for a while and then kind of jump. And that's what hers did. So I asked, okay, so when was the last time you gained that, when were those jumps? So I got the dates on those jumps and then asked her what happened in her life. And then she started to cry in the office as I was talking to her. And there's significant physical and emotional abuse from her partner at the time that came up right at that incident. And what we did was kind of work through that shock handling process with a specific goal of getting her to experience those stuck moods, stuck emotions, and release that attention into the present. And through that, she was able to drop about 17 pounds in about 2 weeks, right?
Wow.
And some of that was just sheer emotional weight she was
Right.
carrying, and just allowing the system to return to stress. So it can happen in different ways with different people, but that idea of when exactly did it begin. So what someone could do is ask themselves that question, look at a timeline. When did you start gaining the weight? What was going on around that time? And looking at that timeline and kind of seeing what that was. And it doesn't have to be an emotional stressor. Could
Mhm.
be a change in diet, could be a change in
Right.
lifestyle, could be I stopped exercising, could be I started drinking more beer, right? It certainly could be those things. But also, I think the point of this episode might be, but it doesn't have to be,
Right.
right? We can also include spiritual, emotional, and mental health in this equation for obesity, and take a look at, broaden our horizons on exactly what could cause that, and be able to include those in our choices of what may have started that process, and then how, and then address it accordingly.
Right, exactly. One of the reasons why I even started doing this podcast was just to make people aware of that there's so many other things out there that, we can put in our toolbox, if you will, for,
Sure.
handling health and wellness. Is like I, said at the start of this, it's not a one size fits all. And there's so many alternatives and things that we can do. Meditation goes a long way.
Sure.
I even prescribe for some people to tell them go get acupuncture, because it's
Yep.
gonna do far more than I can write your prescription, but I'd rather you go get acupuncture to help heal what you have
Sure.
going on right now. So there's just, I do this podcast too, just to bring so much awareness to people like you too, and what you're doing that may be a little bit different out there in
Yeah.
the world that can be helpful to people. So Dr. Jeff, as an author, tell us about your book, Timeless Youth, and how my audience can learn more about it and grab a copy.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Dr. Shayla. So, yeah, some of what we're talking about, in that book, uh, the five timeless youth, with the you in all caps, meaning the all healing begins with you. And it's the five principles of transformational wellness and holistic healing. And what I do is walk through those principles. And we've referenced a couple of them already. The first one, I call the Model A principle, which is one size does not fit all, right? Which is kind of what you mentioned early on in the
Yeah.
podcast. So I think and then the question is, what does that mean? How do we apply that? And how can we use that to create health? I also get into chapters on stress and, what I call the quantum principle, which is basically how energy affects our health, and how non-physical. One of the issues is the allopathic medicine often prioritizes what can be touched, felt, or measured, right? If it shows up on a CT or an X-ray or blood work, easy to quantify, easy to treat. The
Exactly.
only issue is, um, there's the intangible factors like the stress that we're talking about can be much more powerful if we include all of that than just looking at the tangible and what can be measured. So we go through that. We have a chapter on stress, and we have some processes, or we outline the processes and the steps more about what we talked about here, of what someone can do to understand the mechanics of what's going on, so they can be empowered and take some next steps around that. So that book is Timeless Youth. It's available pretty much anywhere books are sold. So it's on Amazon. You can find it through our website, or if you have a favorite local bookseller, you can go there and they can order a copy and have it for you. And just a couple months ago, it came out in Spanish. So if
Ah,
any of these are
awesome.
listening in English, but you prefer to read in Spanish, Tu Eterna Juventud, you can find that one as well.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Dr. Jeff. Do you have a social media handle that my audience can connect with you?
Yeah, probably the easiest way is just find me on Instagram, and it's just my name, Jeff Crippen, Jeffcrippen. You can find me there, and if you have any questions, you can message me, and I'll message you. Be happy to get back to you with any questions, or if you read the book or listen to the podcast and want to go a little deeper on that, I'm there to answer those questions.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on the Essence of Health Tea Time podcast. Click the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so that you never miss a moment of the Essence of Health Tea Time podcast. Check out the show notes to obtain your free tips for healthy living guide to get you started on your health and wellness path. Follow me on social media at Essence of Health Wellness Clinic on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and at dr.tw@eohwc on TikTok. Interested in becoming a member of the Essence of Health coaching program? Well, head on over to www.eohcoaching.com. The essence of health is in you.